also from Lagos and from Sokoto as well, from Ile-Ife as well, from Zaria as well. And you know, it's a pleasure seeing you. I always love traveling to different universities in Nigeria, and it's really a pleasure seeing all of you here. The aim of this small roundtable is really to think together about the ways we can think about teaching, the ways we can think about our own students, because I want our students to be at the center of the way our pedagogy, and also sometimes also the way we can think about different ways of teaching for ourselves. I guess it's for us as well that, you know, I'm thinking about this. So I hope that this roundtable will bring you insights about pedagogy, about the way we teach history in general. We're very lucky today to have Prof. Alola with us. So Prof, thank you for being here with us today. And thank you for your patience as well. Very much appreciated. Thank you. And I think before we give the floor to Prof. Alola, let me just remind you that actually this event will be recorded. This event is live streamed. I hope it's still working. And in case you miss it, you should be online, I suppose, by the end of July. Okay, so that's it as well. It will be edited by our researcher, to be Akinda on the left, and also with the help of Bimbo Mopo, who's here as well with us. So thank you, all of you, for being here. And let's start with Prof. Alola. Thank you, Prof, for your patience, please.
Good morning. It's a pleasure for me to be here with you. I can see you are clapping for me. I can't hear the clap, but that's fine. But what is important is for me
Prof,
to
hang on a second. We can't hear you. We're just going to fix this from here. Sorry, Prof. Prof, sorry, our apologies. We can't hear you. Give us 2 seconds so that we can make sure you speak. Can you try again, please?
Hello, can you hear me now? Good morning.
Can you try, Prof, please?
Hello, good morning.
Can you try, Prof, please? Sorry.
Hello.
Yes.
Morning,
Yes.
morning.
Sorry. Good morning, Prof. Sorry about that. Please, we listen to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure for me to be here today with my colleagues, some of whom I know, some of whom I don't know. I released the paper because it's a long one, and I was given 30 minutes, which means that it's not possible for me to cover many of the points. There are two contests not in the paper. The very moment in time when this important symposium is taking place, ASU strike, and people have not been paid. How do you gather people have not been paid and energize their mood? It's very difficult. And in my conclusion, I will relate issues of survivor to this project, because if people are not being paid, we have to tell ourselves the truth. They are not going to be happy. And it's very serious. I know some of our colleagues who are now driving Uber in Nigeria. So it's a very depressing moment. The other context, which is not in this paper, is that many of our colleagues in Africa must be very cautious about a comparative approach being exaggerated, very misleading in some cases. Some are basically not true. And the impact of social media continues to widen this exaggeration. When I have another moment, I will give a major lecture on the damage that this comparative approach is now creating. And the instigators are scholars in the diaspora. They are making good contributions, but they are also creating enormous damages. The first thing we must get out of our mind is to know that Nigerian history, African history, is actually far more enriched in African universities than in other parts of the world. I'm sure many of you will be shocked to hear this. And I've taught in Australia, I taught in England, I taught in Canada, I've taught in Brazil, I teach in Texas, and I know that compared to interest in Pretoria, Johannesburg, University of Ibadan, Lagos, you are doing far more and much, much better in enriching African universities than many other parts of the world. And the reason is how core interests are constituted. African history is not of core interest in China, not in Russia, where I've had the privilege of going, not even in Europe, where we were colonized. They teach them, that's not the problem, but not as robust as you are teaching them at the University of Lagos. If you review many curricula in American universities, for instance, the opportunities to learn African history is very, very limited. Even in a major department like my own, where we have only 2 people, and in many universities, they have only 1 person. But in the diaspora feedback, that 1 person in the department presents himself or herself as much bigger than Uthman Danfodio University. Second, when it comes to resources to write history, they are far more abundant in Africa than elsewhere. You can walk from, and I'm glad Professor Adishina is here, You can walk from the Department of History to the archives. 5 minutes, you are there. What resources can you compare with that? If you're in Kaduna State, Arewa House is near you. So those resources are abundant. And when you come to observable data, ethnographic data, those resources are far more abundant, so that when it comes to those resources, I cannot be comparing myself with you because your advantages are enormous. Third, from the side of the diaspora, while they publish, they exaggerate through the use of social media the importance of those publications, because those publications actually do not enter into classrooms. They do not, unless the author themselves mount a small seminar to teach their own area of interest. So if, for instance, we're just allowed in my department to teach, say, 2 courses on African history per year, no monograph will ever enter into that syllabus. It's not possible. And it's not true that people of this generation, in one place they love to read, in another place they don't love to read. It is the same. Students don't love to read. That it is not a Nigerian phenomenon. So don't discourage yourself. They don't love to read in Texas, they don't love to read at Princeton, and they don't love to read in Nigeria. It's just basically the same thing. When I got here some 31 years ago, this 5 volumes on African history, volume 5 is 1,000 pages. After a while, the publisher said, this is not working. Reduce it to 3 volumes. You know, if you teach for a semester of 15 weeks, unless it's an honors class, Introduction to Africa, Introduction to West Africa, if you give many of them those big books, they won't read them. Just as they won't read them at the University of Fusuka, they will not even also read them at the University of Arlington. But you tend to exaggerate, and many of you say, oh, if this were in Australia, they will read. I was at Australian National University. They complain, just as students of Ibadan also complain, if you give them too many works to read. Now, the illusion, yet another one, relating to jobs, it is the same thing. If you do history in England, or Vincent will tell you, if you do history in the US, there are no jobs for you, just as there are no jobs in history in Nigeria. Why they are able to get jobs here has something to do with history. It has to do with the expansiveness of the economy, because the economy can shift you to many sectors. At convocation here, commencement, parents have asked me, what is my daughter now going to do after this degree? The same thing that parents will ask at the University of Lagos. What happens is that we don't have a diversified economy to absorb graduates. I live in Austin. Austin is a full employment city, which means that whether irrespective of what you read, there's a job for you. Irrespective of what you read, there's a job for you. So until we create that diversified economy, the issue will remain essentially the same. How do you create jobs for those who want to do history? Finally, history professors do not reproduce themselves. I don't want to use personal experiences of some of my colleagues who are there with you. I saw Professor Alao, Professor Adeboye, myself, none of us, we have not reproduced ourselves. It's the same thing. American professors, just as Nigerian professors, also tell their children, Why do you want to do history? And it's necessary to clear all this so that you don't keep putting yourself in comparative analysis that are basically not true. Many of what you talk about relating to your students, if you go to UK, they say the same thing. If you come to the US, they say the same thing. I won't cover that long paper, but it's divided into various parts for various reasons. The first part, the relevance of history. It may look unconnected, but it is, because we have to also figure out how to communicate to our students. I have had the opportunity of talking to some of history students, and some of them cannot articulate the importance of what they are doing. And we have to articulate it. So we have to energize the students to take interest. We have to develop a strategy to recruit more students. And we have to get support for the history in societies and nations. Don't be depressed. What you are experiencing in Nigeria, they're also experiencing it in the US. It's very difficult to get many majors in many American universities. It's very, very difficult. So if anybody tells you they are interested, they can create majors, that is outside the realm of data. Some departments are even thinking of mergers and things like that. So if it's difficult for you to convince Nigerians about the relevance of Nigerian history, then it will be far more difficult for me to convince people in Texas. But there are regulations in place that mandate the teaching of government and history in some states, as in the state of Texas. They will not give you a degree unless you do history and government. It is mandatory. But the reason which we have not articulated in Nigeria is connected to a project of nationalism. When you construct a project of nationalism, you want to dominate the world. You want to relate the ideology of capitalism to education. Chemistry will not do that for you. Physics will not do that for you. But it is history and government that will do that for you. In other words, how you present the nation, the so-called fathers of the nation, and use knowledge as a bond. History and government will do that for you. So they mandate it for purposes of engineering that. So the first segment, how do we communicate the relevance of the discipline to the public and the people we teach? Because they are the ones that we need to sustain what we do on campuses. In the second segment of the lecture, I narrated the history of history teaching, which is always about context. And I developed the various contexts: colonial period, the colonial history they teach, decolonization, when universities of Ibadan were created. That's a context. You change the syllabus. Disappointment with modernization, we changed the syllabus. Disappointment with the inability to create jobs, we began to combine history and strategic studies, history and heritage, all in an attempt to meet the exigencies of the challenges of the nation in terms of economic underdevelopment. So today, the contest remains: how do we elevate the economy? How do we generate political stability? How do we handle insecurity issues? How do we handle underdevelopment issues? How do we handle poverty issues? Whether we like it or not, we have to teach all of this because they are the context that imposes itself on us as teachers. So this context will continue to shift, and part of the agenda of this symposium is how do you deal with issues when the context has shifted? Nation building, migration, our people are leaving the continent, population growth, ethnicity, religious divisions. These are mandatory contests that will impose on us the curriculum that we have to teach. And the schools and how they respond to this, they're not going to be the same. They are not the same anywhere in the world. If you use UK, syllabus, curriculum, Britain, Scotland, Irish, they're not the same. They can't be the same. Nationalities are different. Context is different. And there is nothing for us to apologize about if the syllabus in Sokoto is different in some ways from that of Nsukka and Ibadan. In fact, we should resist the temptation to make this, to homogenize. We can have a number of unifying courses, but we should also insist that there should be regional focus so that the syllabus at the university, the curriculum of the University of Maiduguri, after a unifying template, will begin to differ because they have to emphasize Kanuri history. We need not apologize for that. It's a global phenomenon. The contemporary challenges, another segment, relate to educational policies outside the context of the universities, but within the context of the imposition by the state. In 1986, the curriculum reviews of the educational system removed the teaching of history and social studies from junior secondary schools. That has nothing to do with you and I. That's a state policy, but we have to respond. And then as state policies change, they impose themselves on us. When you weaken the primary and secondary schools, when you weaken them, it will affect those that we recruit. I was at the University of Abuja one time talking to students, and one student told me that she applied for accounting. They could not admit her for accounting. They said, go and do history. And that after 4 years, that is not where her mind is. That's not where her passion is. And she wasn't interested. That is not a problem that you and I created. And we have to thank the Historical Society of Nigeria. And many of you are here in fighting for the return of history to the primary and junior secondary school. When you say history has been returned, be careful not to also exaggerate it. And if you don't return it to senior secondary, generate interest is going to affect us. In that section, I talk about sources, interest in studying history, which has reduced. It has also reduced in other parts of the world. It's not a Nigerian phenomenon. It's an issue of changes in the economy, changes in IT, questions that parents reach about the outcome of funding education of their kids, about job prospects, so that we have to deal with issues outside of our control. And we have to figure out how to respond creatively. In responding creatively, different country takes different approaches. On my campus, They allow you to double major. They allow you to triple major. You can do history and chemistry. You can do history and nursing. You can do history and pre-med. The fact that you do history does not mean you cannot become a medical doctor. So we do not know how to handle this challenge because the NUC is also very, very strict in terms of approving what we do. But in allowing double major, triple major, some countries have been able to solve that problem. And in allowing people with first degree, irrespective of the discipline, to go and do pharmacy, law, medicine, journalism, they've also solved that problem. Because if the very fact that we admit you for BA in history in my department does not mean you cannot become a pharmacist. It only means that you had courses that will let you be admitted for pharmacy. We have people who finish in history department who have become attorneys and doctors. So that's one way of meeting this challenge within the limits that the country and the regulators allow. A section talks about pedagogy and how do we begin to teach in various ways. And I focus on digital economy, the creativity that the digital world has created. They talk about we don't have books. The digital world has solved that problem. I cannot have access to read. The digital world has solved that problem. Because now, unlike when I was at IFE, you can now access information faster and more efficiently, so that any student who is serious in any topic cannot begin to complain that these materials are not there. How do we reform this curriculum, which I spoke about, in terms of pedagogy, generating interest, how we teach, how we create relevance to the discipline, how we motivate the students, how we adjust to the context, so that today, students, we have to teach them about modernity, development, comparative history, thematic history, and we have to look inwards. As I've argued in some other contexts, that we have enormous epistemological base and foundation that we have not explored, as in kinship, divination, women, and so many things that we have to integrate. And there are many aspects that we cannot disconnect from teaching history. The students want to see, they want to use the internet that is available to them. They want visual. My successful classes are on films, heavily enrolled. Africa and films, I teach that. Africa and photographs, I teach that. The reason is that my generation will focus only on text. In this generation, if you remove visual, you remove films, I teach a class on African photographs. If you remove all those, you cannot attract their interest. It's very difficult. I teach Tunde Kelani, Mainframe, Ponle Afolayan, Nigerian skits, Pastor Parole, all those skits. And that is how one has to connect them to history. Issues of epistemologies will always be there. Let me conclude, because I've spent the time allocated to me, and I know you started very late. Let's reinforce the idea of the importance of history. Let us not abandon the lineage of history, how this history came to us. We cannot abandon that. We cannot abandon the context. And as this context shifts, we have to also review what we teach. We cannot abandon the challenges of the nation, and we cannot abandon creativity. Let me end as I concluded, let me end as I started. If there is no job satisfaction, which is the case now, if people are not paid, life is about solving survival issues, your own existence. You cannot criticize our colleagues. Human beings want to live well. Human beings, when they are sick, they want to go to the hospital. When they have kids, they want the best for their own kids. Any job that does not solve existential issues, if you preach every day from Sunday to Saturday, it's not going to work. And if the people are not motivated, if the teachers are not happy, you can change the curriculum, you can do whatever you like. That sadness will affect the classroom. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, I can't hear you. I can't hear anyone. Oh, I see. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Prof.
Yeah. Vincent, can I take some questions, or what do we do next?
Thank you, Prof. I think they lost the connection in Ibadan, so they will come back very soon.
Oh, so well, were you able to hear my conclusion?
Yes, we were on Zoom. I guess they were too. It just they just lost the connection a minute ago. They will come back very soon.
Can you hear me, Prof? Now we're back. We're back on.
Thank you. We've been talking behind your back.
Ah. Well, let me
Yeah,
thank
theory, but it's practicable. Yes, we ask for more life and strength to continue.
Yes, let me thank you, Prof. Ola, for all this. You know, can you hear me? Yes. Yes. So thank you. Maybe you can ask the room to give you a round of applause, and thank you for your patience. Thank you. I don't think you can see me. You can see. Oh, there you go. You can see me back. I'm back again. Sorry about that. Sorry about this small delay. I really enjoyed it, Prof. And you know, again, this event was recorded for those who couldn't follow us properly. You're able to see it later. Really, thank you for your thoughtful discussion and for your very interesting way of seeing things for the Nigerian history curriculum. Since we're late, I think I will ask Prof. Olukoju to carry on. I think you're online, Prof. Can you hear us?
Yeah, you just spoke a moment ago.
Yes, I can.
Okay, Prof. Do you want carrying on?
Yes, I don't mind if you allow me to do so.
The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the organizers of this panel, of this roundtable, and I thank you for this privilege of addressing you today. I'm not an orator, and coming so soon after Professor Falola, it's a big task. I was expecting that. Prepare myself.
Poetry again is a poem network. No, from our end this time. Well, I've got Atiko Bubaka with us.
Sorry.
Prof.
Am I on now?
Yeah, you're back on. Yes.
Oh, sorry.
Maybe can I ask you to turn your video off, please? This way it's gonna be easier.
Okay. All right. So thank you very much. So I want to say that I start by thanking the organizers of this roundtable and our distinguished keynote speaker and other participants. My contribution will largely draw upon my experience as a student and teacher of history. And I'll just highlight a few things, make some comments, but please allow me to be autobiographical in my presentation. I studied history in various forms from the cradle, thanks to my grandparents who taught me family and community history. That informed to a degree why I studied history eventually at university level. My secondary school had well-trained and committed teachers. History was not popular at that time compared to government, but a few diehards like myself studied it all the same. Even then, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you.
Very good. Even back then in the 1970s, history was not popular compared to government, but a few diehards like myself studied it all the same. At that time, history was known as Obaku Obaje, that is the study of the death and accession of kings. And that should tell us something about the thrust of the subject. The subject was about state formation, warfare, and the exploits of great men and women. History was also highly chronological, going back in time. I studied history from Form 3 and opted for it instead of government. We learned about the ancient kingdoms of Ghana, Mali, and Songhai, and relied on Professor Adubu Ahen's book, Topics in West African History. At the University of Nigeria, Nsukka, I was admitted into the Department of History and Archaeology back then. And it was a school that operated on a syllabus that was famously described as a syllabus structured in concentric circles. That is to say, Africa at the center, Nigeria at the center, Africa and the world. And then we had specific subjects such as comparative study of revolutions, French, Russian, and Chinese, Blacks in the New World, and of course we had courses in archaeology. Let me comment on the competence and commitment of my teachers back then. My history teachers at the secondary school level were graduates of University of Ife and at the MA College of Education, and they all majored in education history. They knew both the content and the pedagogy, and they gave us copious notes. One of them, who inspired my love for history, was J.O. Fajibagbe, an indigenous of Ikoro Ekiti, who taught history extempore in standard university level English. I still recall how he attributed the Moroccan victory at the Battle of Tondibi to, quote, technological superiority coupled with, he gave us other factors. He was also my literature teacher, and therefore he taught history as literature. And the way he told the story of history, it was as if we were there in the court of Mansa Musa. At the University of Nigeria in Nsukka, I had lecturers like Professor Afibu and Ifemesia, and the man who later became Professor Onwuka Njoku, and their lectures were always spellbinding. Afibu and Njoku for the sheer class and grace, and Ifemesia for the erudition and breadth of knowledge. Dr. Ben C. Odum taught me Blacks in the New World and comparative revolutions in the old-fashioned way of giving notes as others did. But he spiced his lectures with asides from his student life in both the United States and the USSR. And he routinely paused the lectures to ask questions. He rewarded correct answers with bonus points towards the final examination grade. All our lecturers exuded depth of knowledge and grasp of the courses, and they gave us copious lecture notes at that time. In fact, I still have my lecture notes back home in Lagos. And this was a measure of competence at the time. Competence was measured by the volume of notes that the lecturer gave. A striking experience at Nsukka was that students were made to attend and present papers at tutorials from the very first trimester of the first year. For us, it was a training in research, writing, and public presentation, which helped us in later careers as lecturers, as administrators, and so on and so forth. We also faced further tests in history. We had to do a special paper in either Sokoto Caliphate or Southeastern Nigeria, where we had to read and analyze original documents, such as translations of Arabic text. I did Sokoto Caliphate. The other test was for us to write a final year project along essay based on original research, supervised by a lecturer. At the University of Ibadan, my master's level courses in history, Institute of African Studies, political science, cut across several fields, anthropology, fine art, music, and all that. The courses were taught in the seminar style, where students made presentations on assigned topics. The course was rounded off with a project supervised by a lecturer. There was only one compulsory course in history at the time, the course on theories and concepts of history. I want to comment just briefly on our attitude as students then and now. Today, now, there's a fear of bulky notes as it was then, and tedious note-taking, the cramming of dates and events, and the writing of long essays in high standard English. Invariably, only those who had a strong background in English and literature at the time in my secondary school felt at home studying history. Everyone in my generation of history honors graduates had studied history and chosen to study it in preference to other courses. I come to my experience at the University of Lagos. Over my 38 years of university teaching, I've observed certain continuities: the copious notes, the hardcore of committed students, the focus on Asian history, spicy colonial history. However, rapid changes have taken place in the last 20 years, the most striking being the hyphenation or hybridization of history at the university level in the face of dwindling enrollment and the phasing out of the subject at the secondary level. This change has had its defenders and critics, and the jury is still out on whether the drive towards hybridization in the late 1990s and early 2000s was an altogether helpful exercise. My impression is that, at least at the University of Lagos, it rescued the discipline of history from extinction, as the expanded course offerings and the new name attracted genuinely interested students. Parents deliberately insisted on their wards studying with us. Our department no longer was a dumping ground for rejects from other disciplines. We can even now afford to turn down students. Our MA classes are oversubscribed. This is the result of an overhaul of the course offerings in 2004. That is my last year in office as head of department. And then, of course, we recruited qualified staff to handle the new courses. However, there are some disquieting developments which were not anticipated in 2004. One is that mainstream history, that is political history, economic history, and social history, is being gradually pushed to the margins by the softer aspects of history, international relations and strategic studies, which appear more glamorous. Those courses attract more students in terms of subscription and specialization at the upper undergraduate and postgraduate levels. The long-term danger is that history as a discipline might suffer a second phase of marginalization, this time from within. In concluding this presentation, I want to make the following suggestions for transforming the history curriculum at the tertiary level. I want to say that some of my ideas have been captured in Professor Falola's masterful presentation, but since I wrote this one, please permit me to just read what I propose as what we could do to promote history. The first point I want to make is that our curriculum should have breadth, covering different aspects, economic, social, and political. It should cover time frames, everything from pre-colonial to the present. It should cover geographic spaces, because history is, or should be, the humanities discipline par excellence. History should answer the basic questions: what, who, where, how, when, and of course, with what consequences. My second suggestion on curriculum is that our curriculum should be thematic, covering themes, and they should be in our curriculum should be in concentric circles, radiating from a core of the local to the outward periphery of the global. My third suggestion is that, and Professor Falola has captured this, while we observe the benchmark minimum academic standards BMAS, we should avoid homogenization. In effect, the curriculum of an institution should incorporate the history of the micro and macro host communities. My fourth point under curriculum is that students should be exposed to a variety of course offerings within and beyond the discipline of history. One aspect is to engage other disciplines such as geography, which is critical to, but often taken for granted in historical studies. History is located in time and space. We often overlook the spatial or relational dimension, which is where colleagues trained in France seem to have an edge because of their embrace of geography. Excuse me. In terms of pedagogy, I have the following suggestions to make. The first is that guest lecturers should be involved from cognate disciplines in the humanities and sciences in teaching, even if it's just a module or a topic of interest. At the University of Nigeria, for example, Professor Martin Ijeri, an agricultural economist, once visited our class in economic history to make an informal presentation. Other lecturers in the same department could be invited for the same purpose. In fact, I recommend that our courses should be taught by teams. In other words, we should adopt team teaching for the purpose of giving breadth to our students. My second suggestion on that pedagogy is that teachers should strive to enliven their teaching because history ordinarily is a dull subject. You should do that by breaking it down. In other words, explaining in accessible language appropriate to the level of our students. My third recommendation is that teachers should apply the topic to contemporary issues such as governance, leadership, social and environmental justice, and the global political economy. This is what in Lagos we call utilitarian or applied history, for which our department has carved a niche for itself. My fourth suggestion, teachers should cite authorities and engage with the literature, thus teaching the students the elements of critical analysis. We should emphasize text, subtext, and context. My next suggestion, teaching should emphasize knowledge because it is what one has that can be applied. We should equip our students with the substance of what they should know. We cannot afford to produce ignorant historians. The next suggestion, teachers should make students express themselves in class discussions and in writing. History is about writing. We should teach, we should emphasize and help them develop analytical writing and speaking skills. My next suggestion, we should also listen to our students to find out what they found difficult to grasp and why. While also explaining to them we should explain to them why certain core courses needed to be taken to make them rounded history and humanities scholars. My next suggestion, teachers could reverse roles by asking the students to state in 1 or 2 sentences salient lessons or takeaways from today's lecture. In assessing students, the stress should be on written examinations, not MCQ, not multiple choice questions, coupled with the impromptu in-class quiz to test their cognition of the subject. My final point now, ladies and gentlemen, history is as good as the curriculum, the teachers, and the pedagogy, all of which we must develop at the same pace in a coordinated manner. I want to thank you for your patience. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor. I love all these points. I'm sure they will create lots of conversations even here. I've heard people talking about them already. So thanks a lot. We're gonna have time for questions later. So can I ask our next speaker, Professor Alao, to come to the floor, please? Please, Professor Alao. From OAU, Ile-Ife. Do you want to sit or do you want to stand? You choose, really.
Good morning.
Well, but you sit here? Here? Okay, how could you sorry. But sorry, can I ask you to sit? Is that okay? Sorry, Prof. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the organizers of this roundtable for the opportunity to be a part of the discussion here today. This is a topic that I've been turning over in my mind for quite some time, and you have provided a wonderful opportunity for me to reach a wider audience. It's about Nigeria history curriculum and the imperative of curriculum review. Let me start with an introduction that the relevance of history has been established and demonstrated over time. It is no longer in doubt that history is relevant and necessary in any organic society. In Africa, we have seen the various contributions of history to nation building and to society. If you look at the trajectory of history education in Nigeria, you will see a recourse to the pre-colonial era and the indigenous historical consciousness of the people and the emergence of the local historian at every level of our engagement with society. Nigerian societies, African societies put a lot of premium on the activities of the local historian. And that's why in many African societies, there are important classes of people dedicated to the preservation of the history of their societies. It's just to underscore the relevance of history in an African society. The consciousness is there and put drive forward by the local historians. Carry this over to the colonial period, and you see the birth of a new tradition of academic history, moving away from the earlier tradition of indigenous history into an era of academic history, pioneered at Ibadan, when Ibadan was established in 1948. And we had the introduction of history as one of the first set of courses to be taught at Ibadan. It was as a result of the realization by the colonial authorities of the relevance of history and how we can use history and what history provides to move the society forward, especially a society like the Nigerian society of that period. So this led to the emergence of the Ibadan School of History. And many of us are familiar with the activities, with the productions, with the nature, character, and philosophy of the Ibadan School of History. We have some of them identified here. The Ibadan School of History was characterized, like Professor Olukoju said, by a colonial curriculum defined and designed to meet the needs of the colonial enterprise in Nigeria. The curriculum was skilled in African discourses, and this seriously affected the relevance of history in a society just emerging from the pre-colonial environment. We also have in the Ibadan School of History scholarly productions. The first generation of teachers and those who earned their PhDs from Ibadan were encouraged to embark on production of academic materials. They turned their dissertations and theses into books, and there was the support of a British publishing outfit for the emergence of literature on Ibadan. And so this became the hallmark of the Ibadan School of History. Coupled with it was the establishment of the Historical Society of Nigeria, which became an academic association for the expansion of knowledge in historical studies. And even till today, the Historical Society of Nigeria is still playing a pivotal role in defining the nature and character of history education in Nigeria. And we equally have the establishment of the National Archives. The National Archives became a center of rigorous academic activities. The exploits of the first Vice Chancellor and historian to establish the National Archives here on campus actually moved the opportunities for historical studies further. And the National Archives had extension in Kaduna and Enugu. And this will underscore the relevance of data for historical reconstruction. Ibadan was just launching into an era of not just writing history, but reconstructing social reality. And the Ibadan School of History provided an opportunity for this, coupled with the existence of the National Archives. However, and this is most unfortunate, that there is a criticism of the Ibadan School of History as being too devoted to the documents available at the archives, to the extent of developing what we call canonical obedience to the documents. And no document can tell you more than what the author wants you to know. And it was an opportunity for the colonial enterprise to use the documents and scholarship in history to promote British colonial enterprise in Nigeria. And so we have a redefinition of the focus of the Ibadan School of History, the methodology of history writing, and production of knowledge in history. Let us look at the goals of history. Let us look at the goal of history education. For a developing country like Nigeria, the goal of history education should be clearly defined. And for me, one major goal is the development of the mind, creating thoughts and ideas. Because I believe ideas rule the world. Without a fertile mind, without an imaginative mind, without a mind that is prospective, there's no way ideas could be developed. And one of the goals of history, of which developers of history curriculum should be aware, is the opportunity to develop the mind, to create opportunities for students to create new tools and new pathways, so as to influence their society. Their ideas and thoughts will be reflective of the realities of their society, and therefore contributing to the development of their society. History also has it as a major goal, understanding and making sense of the past. It's not just to read about the past. It's not just to flow with the past. It's about understanding the past. And understanding the past, not just for its own sake, but to underscore the failures and successes of the past. And that's one major goal of history. And every history curriculum must reflect this goal. Then we also have history as a repertoire of intrinsic cultural values. African societies are value-leading societies. And in all aspects of African life, we have values coming forth and influencing how people relate and conduct their activities in society. If history, therefore, is a study of the past in time perspective, it therefore means that history must be a repertoire of cultural values. And these cultural values are intrinsic in each and in the respective cultures. And to the extent that history writing, history teaching, history education must reflect these cultural values and must provide opportunities to demonstrate the relevance of these cultural values. And these values are what are needed in any society that is moving forward. Therefore, with these goals, we see a kind of disconnect between the existing curriculum in history and what history should be doing for an organic society like the Nigerian and African society. What then are the challenges of existing curriculum? In addition to what Professor Falola and Professor Olukoju identified as the challenges of existing curriculum, I'd like to add the following, that there is inadequate understanding of trends and dynamics of social reality. A careful review of the existing curriculum will reflect an inadequate understanding of the trends and dynamics of social reality, because we are not too grounded in the theory, in the concepts, the practice of our societies in which we live, and we are not too familiar with the dynamics of social reality. We have inadequate understanding of these dynamics in our society, and our subject offerings, especially at the tertiary level, reflect this inadequacy, and it's a major challenge of the existing curriculum. The existing curriculum also promotes and encourages poor reading culture and limited familiarity with existing literature and state of knowledge. I think Professor Olukoju referred to it when he was giving an example about the situation of copious note-taking in class. Students are, in the existing curriculum, students are never allowed to roam the fields, to travel as far as possible, to get familiar with existing literature and debates, and to read extensively. We still have a colonial attitude of taking notes in class and relying exclusively on these notes to pass our exams. I think the focus has always been on passing exams in history. and not actually developing the mind. Our curriculum should try as much as possible to encourage students to look beyond passing exams and developing their minds to develop ideas that will move the society forward. It is also an evident weakness is relating history syllabuses to pivotal issues and problems in the philosophy of history. This is very important, and it's a very sad development in the sense that many of the course offerings in our universities today are not related or are not treated with a background of an understanding of the pivotal issues in the philosophy of history. Every discipline has its own history, and these are pivotal to the understanding and relevance of that discipline. It defines so many things for the discipline, and it gives the discipline that disciplinary identity. We are losing the disciplinary identity of history largely as a result of the neglect of the pivotal issues in history. We are no longer asking the question why. When you answer the question why, then you have the opportunity of exploring all other questions as when, how, and why not. But we are no longer looking at facts as the building blocks of history. We just state the facts without connecting the facts. And that is why history is disengaged from reconstruction. It is more or less literature, just narrative without the engaging aspect of it in reconstruction. History is about reconstructing social reality. And you use your facts as the building blocks for this historical reconstruction. So there's this disconnect between the syllabus and the pivotal issues in history education and in the philosophy of history. Let us also take the example of a major philosophical issue in history. That is objectivity. How do we relate teaching in Nigerian history and culture to historical objectivity? How do we relate teaching the 19th century revolutions in West Africa to objectivity in history? How do we understand these historical developments from a philosophical perspective that will give the discipline the type of identity that is expected? There is also this important aspect of historical philosophy, or the philosophy of history, which is about causal explanation. In every historical discourse, you are trying to establish causal relationship among a welter of historical happenings. Our courses are no longer pointing attention to the capacity and the need to establish causal relationships. And that's why our narratives are always guilty of monocausal explanations, as opposed to multi-causal explanations. And in history, there is a way you write history that gives you, your writing, the identification that is needed as a work in history. And that's the way you make use of your facts to present an argument in a constructive way. Our curriculum should challenge our students to take history along this line and to engage in their writing to reflect their understanding of causal explanation. Then again, we run away from the use of ideology because it's very important. There must be a framework that will guide your analysis, your reconstruction. But when it is fluid, when it's not guided by anything, we run away from it because we are misled by the word ideology. The word ideology could be breaking down to organizing framework, to organize your thoughts, to bring your thoughts together, and to present a coherent explanation of the phenomena you are studying. And that's the more reason why our courses in history must reflect the ideology. And you cannot divorce the historian from himself. History is a science and an art. A science in the sense that you are devoted to the cult of facts, to a level of objectivity, and your reconstruction must cohere or correspond to existing truth. But it is personal because you cannot divorce the historian from his writing. History is a reflection of who you are, of your predispositions, of your preferences, of your state of knowledge and even of your ideology and beliefs. And one other existing challenge is the loss of disciplinary identity as a result of the adoption of inappropriate methodologies in history. The social sciences, they are almost conquering the historical methodology because of the way we structure our curriculum. We referred to combined courses earlier. And in combined courses, you have a mixed blend of methodologies and approaches. And hybrid methodologies are not the best for historical studies. History curriculum must have their methodological identity, and it must have a definite approach, and it must be regarded as history, even when it's read by somebody far away from your area of study. It is possible for me to take a work of history written by an American and still come to a conclusion that this is history as different from political science. That disciplinary identity must be there. But presently, the curriculum that you run are not reflective of this disciplinary identity, largely as a result of our impatience, largely as a result of the rush to make history utilitarian and meet the needs of the present society. We are always concerned about Okay. 5 minutes left? Okay. Now that I've identified the challenges, what then are my suggestions from a new approach? I would like to suggest that we decentralize curriculum development and review. In Nigeria, it has been over-centralized. And the earlier professors talked about this, the overarching influence of the Nigerian Universities Commission and other agencies, especially the Nigerian Education and Research Development Unit. They play a larger than life role in the review of history curriculum. We also need to remove bureaucratic bottlenecks in curriculum review and encourage regular and periodic review of our curriculum. In our universities, especially in my universities, we have enormous difficulties reviewing our curriculum because of the bureaucratic bottlenecks. It will have to go through the department, to the faculty, to the university, and eventually to Senate. Such a long process that it will take almost forever for you to review a curriculum in history. Then again, history teachers are not encouraged or are not supported to develop curriculum in their areas of academic specialization and interest. You must teach major courses. We are always teaching major courses because of inadequate facilities and funding to develop new curriculum that will reflect the need of the society. There's also the need to define the goals of history education and articulate learning objectives to reflect and address contemporary realities. The goals of history education will continue to change because the society is always changing. The society is organic, and the needs of the society will continue to change. Therefore, the goals of history education should continue to change, and our curriculum should reflect this changing scenario in our realities. Then Professor Falola mentioned this, and I think I just want to reiterate the fact that we must, the new curriculum must demonstrate the relevance of history education to society to life and to livelihood. It's very important. It's not just to demonstrate the relevance of history to life or to society, but the three put together, society, life, and livelihood. Because what we offer must answer these three areas of concerns. The new curriculum should be relevant to the society. It must be relevant to the way you conduct yourself in life as a member of that society and your livelihood within the context of the society. And there are also the need to adopt new teaching methods to cater for differing needs of students at varying levels of education. This is very important to me because my teaching in teaching history at the tertiary level has demonstrated one of our offerings today. The tendency to teach history with the same methodology and attitude to someone at the level of the first year and to another at the level of the final year. There should be a difference. Our methodologies must reflect this graduation, and the rigors that we introduce to historical scholarship must be a reflection of the state of understanding and knowledge of each particular class of students. Then each university or department should concentrate on specific areas of strength and comparative advantage. It's not just to be regional in your development of curriculum, but it must be a reflection of your specific areas of strength and comparative advantage. We cannot just begin to recruit staff all over again, but where we have our strength, where we have comparative advantage over other institutions in our immediate neighborhood or far away, then we must develop competence in this area and develop our curriculum in such a way as to take advantage of our strength and comparative advantage. And that gives us the opportunity of collaboration. Collaboration with departments of history far-flung away from Africa and from wherever they are. And on this, I'd like to thank you for your very kind attention. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. I am Dr. Ayodele Abolorunde from the Department of History, University of Ibadan. So I'm standing in for the President of the Historical Society of Nigeria, that's Professor Okpe, as the National Business Manager. So he told me to represent him at this important gathering. And my discussion this morning will be centered on the history of curriculum from the perspective of the inputs or impact of the Historical Society of Nigeria. Because like Prof says, when he was presenting, and other speakers before him, Historical Society of Nigeria as a body had played pivotal roles in ensuring that the curriculum in Nigeria, especially history as a discipline, has been redefined over time. Of course, look at the history of curriculum. Arguments will be anchored on two concepts: curriculum, set of courses, and their content offered in any school system, then history. Or from the layman definition, we know that history is the study of past human activities. But of course, there's need for a man to continue to interact with the past, and in order to provide solution to the present. That's why EHK said that it's a continuous dialogue between the past and the present, and an unending dialogue for that matter. And that the fact of history does not come to a historian in pure form, but it is what the historians interpret. Now, looking at the history of curriculum in Nigeria, I would like to start from the role played by, there's no way we discuss it without our famous School of History. At independence, the moment after we attained our independence, the curriculum in Nigeria, especially in the departments, had been designed to suit or to sustain the Eurocentric view. And we have the likes of our forebears who actually fought vehemently to ensure that that curriculum no longer, was no longer deployed for the usage of the students. So the likes of Kennedy employ staff members who also join him in that struggle to dismantle that curriculum and move it to Afrocentric view. And through that, he employed the likes of GFI Ajayi, Obaro Ikeme, and the army of Ibadan. The school began to engage in decolonization process. And it was through their efforts that the HSN was also established at the national level, at the first professional discipline in the country. That was in 1955. So they continued the struggle. The decolonization was completed. Of course, after about 10 years of independence, the school began to wane in terms of methodology, in terms of what to engage. And that was why PPAK said in his inaugural lecture, which he delivered in this university in 1980, Colonialism and Social Structure, that Ibadan School of History suffered from theoretical extortion, even though some of us disagree with that. And of course, the historians began to make wave. And scholars after independence, especially after the Civil War, began to engage the curriculum by focusing more on history of Africa. So many works exist in this regard. We know that we have the likes of area power and diplomacy in northern Nigeria. We have the likes of Tekina Tamuno, Ayondele, the Nigerian society and educated elite. So most of these scholars and other historians in other parts of the country engage in historical scholarship about Africa. And historians began to bestrode the corridor of powers in the 70s, in the 80s, and such that some of them were appointed as ministers, federal ministers. Our own former vice chancellor and a former head in our department, that was in person of Professor Adewoye, was a federal minister. And we have the likes of Ari Adile. So historians became the signature of bureaucrats in Nigeria. But by the 1980s, especially 1981, between 1981 and 1982, so the deposit of love of history began to wane down. And suddenly there was this conspiracy by the political elite, and history was deliberately expunged from the school curriculum and was replaced with social studies and civic education. And from that time, the historical society took that battle and began to fight. For about 35 years, history was expunged. And unfortunately, the damage that done to the present problem we are facing is that we now have generations of Nigerians that do not know about the country they live. The only Nigerian they know is what they are living through. 35 years, 3 generations. So they don't know. Some of them don't even know how the Civil War was fought. Some of them don't know the June 1993, which has been declared one of the first and fairest elections in our history. So they don't know the country they live in. So HSN took that battle, and by 20, of course, the battle started right from the time of the late Professor Atai. And Professor Atai was succeeded by Professor Ochefu, Professor Gbogbo, Akinwumi, and the rest. And eventually, by 2017, history was returned to the school system. Of course, when that happened, the battle was now taken to another level, which HSN has been trying to actually ensure that some of these challenges were surmounted. For instance, now, after the discipline had been restored, there was this problem of how to get capable manpower to teach this history. And when HSN won this battle, the NERDC, that's Nigeria Educational Research Council, mandated HSN to write, and the body wrote, and the philosophy that guided the writing of history this time, HSN was being careful so that what befell the discipline in the previous decades will not befall it in the future. And it redesigned the philosophy. And what was the philosophy? That history should be taught, not because, what discouraged most people in the 80s was that history was burdensome, it was too copious, that there was need to decentralize. So HSN now decentralized the curriculum by ensuring that the children must know the history of their local government first. Of course, the history of the community they grew up or they are growing up, their local government. When they know the history, then they move it. When you get to GSS, then you move it to states. Before you can talk of the country. So it was designed so that history will be attractive to the children and to the present generation. And not only that, the HSN also ensured that pictures, so that to attract the children so that they will be interested in studying the discipline. Having done that, and the society engaged in NERDC, engaged RDRDC, and the textbooks written were approved. But the problem we are now having is that who are those that will teach the history? Problem of manpower. Why? Because there are no history graduates because of the decades of enrollment at the university level. And to be recalled that some of our departments across the country, because of this danger and fear of losing their lecturers losing their jobs, had to adopt or dilute the name history and this and that. I think my guy, Professor Adesina, has delivered it in his inaugural lecture in 2012 that the fear, most the department here in Ibadan was approached, and the department insisted that no, it has to be history. So most people who are also graduates of history, now that history has been restored to the school system, we don't have the manpower because the so-called history graduates, they were not actually equipped with methodological qualities that they required when they were in school. Because we now have history, we have some history department where even have political scientists as the head of department. So that is the challenge the HSN is facing now. And to solve this problem, recently HSN had been collaborating with NRDC and other relevant government agencies to ensure that people who were trained at the university level in the past are retrained. Not only that, there's for us to redesign our curriculum so that the cooperation between the bureaucrats, like that's those who occupied the government offices like NRDC, and manpower in the university, there must be that collaboration such that what should determine our curriculum should be shaped by our prevailing circumstance, so that history will not only be the subject matter of recalling the past alone, but to solve the present problem, and that can sustain our nation building project. And that is what HSN is doing. Now, how do we summon this challenge or these challenges? We have resolved that where there should be cooperation. Like Prof said, our teaching method should not be static. It shouldn't be static. It shouldn't be that, oh, I've been adopting this method at individual level and as a department, let us continue. No, but we must be dynamic. And that dynamism must be anchored on, or should be anchored on, what is happening in our country. And there should be that cooperation between the manpower, that means the departments in the universities across the country, and government officials, so that history will not be seen as a discipline that has been designed to just talk about history of the past or past human event, but to solve our prevailing problem. What we have today now, why we are in this mess as a nation, is because those who even constitute more than 70% of our population don't even know where the country, they don't even know the country. They don't know the country at all. Of course, the elite, the political class has succeeded in ensuring that they don't know the country they are. That is why they are actually perpetuating themselves, and that we are where we are today. So we believe that once the curriculum, there's that cooperation between the manpower in the university and the government officials in determining how the curriculum will appear over time. And that change must be anchored on our prevailing circumstance. And that will enable us to produce more manpower that will be able to teach our children the history of the country based on our past and our present circumstance. And that will enable us to sustain the nation building project. I think that has been the effort of the HSN so far in ensuring that history as a discipline is not only returned, but the dynamism that will solve our problem of the past and the present is put in place so that people will no longer see history as history of Mansa Musa or an event of Mansa Musa, or some people went to Mecca in the 15th century. No, but as a tool of critical deconstruction of societal problem and as a tool of providing solution to social problem. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Doctor. Thanks a lot. Amazing conclusion in particular. Now we've got time for questions. Since we're a bit late, I won't take many. I guess I will take two from the room and two from Zoom. Okay, Prof, you've got one question here.
Thank you very much. My question is addressed to Professor Alao. In his presentation, he lamented about what he called hybrid methodology, which he said is not good, that history is gradually losing its identity. Now, my concern is that the debate on curriculum, we should not isolate it from larger debates in the historical process and the historical profession. Because now we are in the era where we are looking for grants to do research, third-party grants, because our institutions cannot fund all these grants. And then part of the requirement is collaborative research. And in collaborative research, if the historian is joining other scholars, you have to be amenable to mixed methodology. You will not go there and insist that the entire research has to be based on your historical methodology. Now, if we are not going to put that mixed methodology or campaign for it in curriculum review now, at what point do we want to do that? Are we going to look like double-faced people? Our graduate students that we taught at the undergraduate classes and we told them history alone. And then in our larger research networks, for which we have won this big grant, we bring in those same graduate students and research assistants to be mentored. And now we are talking about mixed method. Then we ask us questions. So now that we are talking about research reform, historical curriculum reform, I think we should also not shy away from mixed methodology, hybrid methodology. That doesn't mean we will lose our identity. You will still be the historian, but you listen to what other people are saying. We can also use quantitative, adopt quantitative methodology into our qualitative. It makes it better. And then our voices are heard in several other platforms, apart from our own historical audiences that we are used to speaking to. Thank you.
Debate is good.
I think the debate is continuing. The Ife school and the Lagos school. My quick reaction to your question would be to say that this roundtable is on curriculum development and not scholarship in history. We are talking about the curriculum that we teach our students. We are talking about the relevance of history to our own society. It is quite different from the scholarship of the historian with his or her extensive global network. And what we have been missing is the fact that he who pays the piper dictates the tune. And that is why our curriculum is no longer reflective of the needs of our own societies. The social science academies, they are promoting scholarship in their own area because of the global coverage of the social sciences. But history is area specific, it's culture specific, and it addresses the issues in any given society. And to that extent, what we teach must be a reflection of the needs of that society in which we are located. We must not allow our pursuit of excellence in historical scholarship to affect adversely the direction of the courses that we teach in our local universities. Our major concern must be to make history relevant within the context of that society and meet the needs of that society. Thank you, Ma.
All right, thank you very much. My name is Leia Komolafe from Philosophy Department. I think there are two issues to be addressed here, and I think they are very important. The first concerns whether or not we consider the contextual basis of teaching history as important to the curriculum, or we are concerned about teaching history itself without necessarily placing it within a context. And this is what I mean. There is what we can call a deontic approach to a discipline. That is the duty of representing what that discipline is, bar any form of functionality or immediate need of a particular field. For instance, within the discourse on decolonization, there has been serious concerns about placing philosophy within the need of the immediate African space. And I think I find that quite problematic. While they are not mutually exclusive, you do not necessarily need to situate a discipline within the immediate context. If that's what we want to do, then expunging Socrates, Plato, and co. from discourses would then not be frowned at. But how do we have a dual approach that while we still maintain that duty to the core of a discipline, we are also not saying that those who then want to contextualize can't raise questions about whether this is important or not. Because if I pick some historical text of the 70s, of the 80s, in fact, I pick Adi Ajayi, pick from Adi Ajayi to the Baba in who was in the source. I'm sorry, I've forgotten the name now. You see text, their research on, say, the old Oyo Empire, and they necessarily didn't put that within a particular context to say, well, at this point in time, power has shifted hands. Now this is the region that has this structure of power. So let's make history relevant to that space which holds power. But it's just a matter of maintaining that core of a discipline, and not necessarily because of its functionality. That is my own view regarding this. Thank you.
Online question. I think Professor Alao wants to respond to it. So he's shaking your head. Yeah, I know, but I think you have something to say.
I want to thank you for the brilliance of your question, and say that what you are trying to do in curriculum review is to re-establish the functionality of history and its relevance. It's a part of a bigger story. But what is necessary now is to relocate the focus of historical studies or historical education so that we offer history to a generation of students who will appreciate what they are taking as history as opposed to political science or to geography or to sociology. You can have multidisciplinary approach, transdisciplinary approach. You can have reinterpretation, and you can, on the basis of your philosophical and intellectual capacity, you can reinterpret. And that's why history is a reconstruction. It is based on the state of your knowledge and your capacity to do what they call second order thinking. And that is what enriches your interpretation. But at the level of designing curriculum for probably the elementary school level, the secondary school level, or from the tertiary education level, certain things must be primary. And that is the identity of that discipline, so that you don't lose it in the mix with other disciplines, because the relevance of the discipline is coded in the identity. And that's why you preserve it. So the issue of functional relevance of history must be such as to guide our design of the curriculum. We cannot, because of what is global, forget the functional relevance of the discipline within the context of our own society and of our own age. If that is removed, then history will no longer answer the name history, because it's a reflection of human activities in time perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. We're going to have a break just after the last question from our online audience, from Mansour Moritella. Okay, so please, Mansour, can you hear us? Ask your question, please, or make a comment.
Okay, thank you very much. Moritella Mansour is my name. I want to thank everybody present. Hello, I'm on?
Maybe you're on YouTube.
Can you hear me? I'm on. Hello?
It looks like just we need to have a coffee break. That's what it means then, basically. It's a sign for a coffee break. Sorry, Mr. Mansour, we can't hear you. So for a coffee break, can I ask first the participants and the lecturers in the room to, if they want, to get a cup of coffee or tea, just turn left here and straight on. There's a small room there. Okay, please help yourselves. And then after that, when they finish, we can ask the rest of the audience to go there. Is that okay? Well, can we meet here again in, I guess, 20 minutes? So a bit more, maybe 20 minutes. 20 minutes. So let's start again at 11:30. Okay, 11:30. Thank you. See you in 20 minutes. Hello. Okay.
Raindrops falling on me, the heart is running on beat.
Thank you. Welcome back. And I think our next speaker is already up, is already standing up. Thank you. Before we just start, where's my co-host? Let me introduce you to him like very in person. Dr. Jimo Mufotolo Washagon. We thought together about this conference. He was a bit late this morning because of traffic. That's him. So thank you, Dr. Jimo. Thank you. And it's like, yes, the lions. The barbarians or lions? Lions.
Are you sure it's lions?
No, it's lions. Yeah. Prof, our next speaker then will be the head of department sorry? Yes. Well, it's a big boy in history. The head of history department at the University of Ibadan, Professor Olutayo Adeshina. Thank you for coming today. Very much appreciated. Thank you. I'm very happy that you agreed to give this talk. So thank you. Please. Do you want to sit or stand?
Ladies and gentlemen, I am not going to stand on existing protocols. I'm going to sit on existing protocols. Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to be here, and I thank the organizers for inviting me to this august occasion. I can identify with the topic under discussion, and I am here to contribute my 2 kobo to what has been discussed. Well, I have carefully structured my topic to read History of Curriculum Reform in Nigeria, the Ibadan School of History Experience. This is because I am trying to contextualize what in theory has been done in practice. This is very significant because as everybody knew, and you still know, the Ibadan School is the iconic school of history that we have in this country. And whatever every university does in Nigeria must have taken a cue from what took off from Ibadan, including Lagos, of course. Well, I have listened to Professor Falola. I have also listened to Professor Alao, as well as the representative of the president of the Historical Society of Nigeria. But one thing that has actually defined historical scholarship in the shadows is an aphorism of unknown provenance, and which says that it is easier to change the course of history than to change a course in history. You know, this is very significant because having listened to everyone talk about curriculum in history and having seen the introduction written by IFRA in respect of this program, saying that hardly had anything changed in history curriculum from the 1970s. And I said, that's too much. You know, unless you are within the system, or unless you have also experienced what has been going on within the system, you won't identify the changes that had gone on within the curriculum development in several Nigerian universities. I remember distinctly that when we were in secondary school, the trip by Mansa Musa in 1324 to Mecca, in which he single-handedly ruined the economy of Egypt, was taught to us as a reflection of the wealth of Mali, of Africa, of African rulers. But ever since I began to teach the economic history of West Africa, I have also reinterpreted what happened in 1324 as profligacy, rather than as a reflection of the wealth of Africa and its rulers. Because for God's sake, how will you enter another man's territory with so much gold that you ruin the economy of that territory? And so if you teach that to our students now, they don't identify with it as a sign of wealth. They identify with it as a sign of stupidity. So, in essence, what I'm trying to say is that you are the teacher. You have the tools. But of course, history is not about narrativity alone. It is also about analysis. It is also about interpretation. And so if you continue to interpret historical documents the same way it had been interpreted in the 1950s and 1960s without understanding the context and the aspiration of that context, then there's a problem. Teaching students of history now has imposed on us certain responsibilities, certain realities, and certain desires. One important course I've been teaching since I came here is History 403, Development, Concepts and Realities in the Third World. Concepts and Realities in the Third World. I have seen myself teaching that course from a different perspective ever since I began to teach it in 1994. In 1994, I taught the course with so much optimism, so much, hope. And I am sorry I have misled my students for several generations. Now, having seen the trajectory of development in Africa, I am now teaching History 403 from a different perspective. It's the same course. It's the same course. So if the course has remained the same with its title, what are the sub-themes that we teach? These are things that are central to the way we have to understand curriculum changes within the context of Nigerian universities. And so, historical interpretation is very important. And so let us quickly look at my position on how curriculum has metamorphosized within the context of Ibadan. And I have told you that one belief that was common was that it was easier to change the course of history than to change a course in history. But you also have to identify the fact that to study history is to study change, is to study identity, is to study transformation. So how will you then say that history curriculum is like the laws of myths and partial, immutable? It changes not. No, it does. It does. And one thing I have seen with Ibadan is that over time, the curriculum had always taken on the toga of change and transformation, even when it looks like it is a continuity. And so embedded within the historical scholarship in Ibadan is that imperceptible change, but that is nonetheless there. So unless you are perceptive enough, and unless you are interested in what you are there to do, you will think it is the same thing that we had been handling. You know, when you listen to history students at times, it gives you a wrong impression of what is going on down there. We have caught our students several times from Ibadan telling people outside that they are students of history and diplomatic studies. And when people ask me, oh, so you started doing diplomatic studies, I said, no, we never have a course like that. It is our students who, out of the fecundity of their mind, have created so many courses and propaganda about the name of the Department of History, and who have given us an identity that we never created. So we have remained true to the curriculum and identity of historical scholarship in Ibadan. So as history teachers, we are conscious of the need for change in what we teach and in what we needed to teach. So as part of the preamble, this presentation focuses on the iconic Ibadan School of History and its contributions to curriculum development in historical scholarship. The development of history curriculum in Ibadan since the 1950s has over time reflected historical and cultural changes. And that's the context in which Professor Falala was talking about. You won't understand these changes unless you also understood the context in which these changes took place. And so, these historical and cultural changes are not only local, they are global. They are also national. They are also political. They are also socio-cultural. And so these changes are usually taken on board by those who teach at Ibadan and who from time to time recalibrate not only what they teach, but even the courses we float. We always assume that historians teach the rise and fall of empires, the death of one king after another one. And so when you tell people you are an economic historian or cultural historian or military historian or women's history, they look at you and say, eh? So you have something like that? I say, yes. So the lack of information about what is going on in history, because partly our fault, because we assume that people should know, which is wrong of us. We also have to, like political scientists, like social scientists generally, develop this knack for self-promotion. But we are too decent, too conservative, and too into ourselves to begin to market ourselves in that light, simply because we don't want to be seen as quote unquote hustlers. History as a discipline prides itself in its what do you call it? In its capacity to teach, to train the mind, you know. And so these are the kind of things we actually focus. So at the heart of this, Ibadan was able to offer world-class education, research, and publications through the changes we have experienced. The epistemology that defined the nature of history and historical production in Africa was the perception of backwardness that Africa had come to represent. So if you look at how Ibadan started to create that image, that identity, and that nature as Ibadan School of History, you also have to look at the curriculum that midwifed the Department of History at Ibadan. That was the beginning. So the epistemological foundations of the Ibadan department actually depended very much on colonial Western epistemologies. That was the beginning. And so by the early 1950s, the epistemological crisis that would years later give rise to what became known as the nationalist historiography was the keen desire to roll back colonial historiography. And at the heart of imperialist historiography was the vast, quote unquote, arsenal of derogatory images of Africa amassed to defend the slave trade and later colonialism. And with that, African scholars who we are developing in the 1950s began to understand their roles and relevance within the context of placing Africa back on the world map. So the curriculum and its trajectory should then be understood within the evolutionary narratives. That's how you can make sense of Ibadan's contributions to curriculum development. This provides a better link between theory and practice. So if you don't look at it from that evolutionary narrative, then of course you will miss that link between theory and practice. So what created this approach? And how did this represent an interface of intellectual culture and societal desires? Because we have to understand the societal desires that led to transformation within the historical scholarship in this country. So how did things begin to change? And how did this begin to affect historical scholarship? And how did historical scholarship itself begin to affect societal orientations? These are some of the things that went on with Ibadan. But let us quickly look at certain fundamental assumptions that became very popular, that must have contributed immensely to what went on in Ibadan. And I have taken this from Franz Fanon's The Wretched of the Earth. He said, and I quote, "Each generation must, out of relative obscurity, discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it in relative opacity." So what the scholars of the Ibadan School reacted to had to do with what Franz Fanon was preaching in respect to the responsibility of every generation. It is significant to understand that within the context of historical scholarship. Oh, a time came when the nationalist historiography was the main tool of analysis within the Ibadan School. But when independence came, the trajectory turned to nation building. And when nation building went and states began to fail, what came after that was economic collapse. And within the context of economic collapse, the structural adjustment, the neoliberal philosophy also became significant within historical scholarship. How did all these changes in society affected the curriculum that developed in Ibadan? So we must then identify 4 different epochs within the Ibadan School that influence curriculum changes. The first one is the decolonization period of the 1950s. The second one was the period of nation building, 1960s to 1970s, and the development of the African identity and consciousness. That's the second phase. The third phase had to do with the interface of history and neoliberalism. That's from the mid-1980s to the mid-1990s. The fourth phase is the age of globalism and localism. That's from the 2000s. Identifying these 4 different epochs, you will see changes in our curriculum reflecting the changes in the societal and global realities of these different periods. So how did this reflect? Ibadan's core belief that led to the decolonization of the history curriculum had to do, like I said, with colonialism and the past of the people. The imposed culture and cultural standards of Imperial Britain had defined existence in the colony since the 1900s. Oh, you have to be properly dressed, Properly dressed means turning out in Western attires, eating Western food, thinking like Western people. And so that in itself began to shape people's attitudes and orientations. Black skins, white masks. These were things that began to inform the changes characterized by the Ibadan school. So by the early 1950s, there were questions. There were questions and critical perspectives as to the continued relevance and dominance of Western historiography as a tool to understand Africa. Well, we still have that overhang. Today, we have continued to manifest what people call colonial mentality. And there have been series of efforts, even up till now, to decolonize the curriculum. And the question is the decolonization process of the curriculum working? And what is being taken out and what is being put back? Because the more you decolonize the curriculum, the more there is a stringent call for the decolonization of the curriculum. And then at the Ibadan School of History, we seek to understand what is that thing that we are trying to decolonize. I am not sure that people who are even calling for the decolonization of the curriculum understand what they are talking about. I'm not sure. You know, and so the cultural and intellectual consequences of decolonization became felt within the curriculum of history at the Department of History. So anti-colonial movements left an indelible mark on African history and historiography. So there was a unity of purpose and unity of action between the nationalist class and the intellectuals of the Department of History, because there was a unity of direction. And that direction came when the in 1948 history syllabus that was used in the university continued to revolve around the activities of Europeans in Africa. In 1951, when the first set of 3 students graduated with history as part of their BA general degree courses, the range of courses in the department was still largely tailored towards European history. But in 1952, an important landmark was experienced in the history department. In that year, the honors course in history was established, in addition to the intermediate and general courses already being provided. The establishment of the honors school was not merely a response to student demands. It was also the recommendation of the visitation report on the University College for 1952. But the honors degree course began with 14 students. And with that, the syllabus was carefully planned, though even in 1952, only a small proportion of it was devoted to African and West African history. Even when the curriculum was expanded, we experienced what we would call tokenism, just in the spirit of the times, give them something. But largely, the courses still being taught revolved around European history. Well, then Kenneth Dike came. When Kenneth Dike came, things began to change. So he began to fight for the inclusion of more courses in African history in the honors and general degrees at Ibadan. That was the clear break that Ibadan began to have with European history courses. So from 1954, what you would call the first major curriculum review took place in that department with Kenneth Dike. Thereafter, teaching and research in African history was strengthened with increasing demand for and recruitment of a number of Nigerian scholars, including J.F. Ajayi later on, Anene, Aderibigbe, Ifemisia. They all joined the Department of History and teamed up with Kennedy to look at the curriculum, and they began to review what they considered should be the focus of history in an African university. And so, like Professor Alao said, there is no way you can run away from the local context. No way. Yes, in as much as you are trying to be a global citizen, we will take care of that global need and desire, but without losing sight of the local context. And so, yes, globalization is important. You are children of the world. We teach you about Asian tigers. We teach you about what is going on in the EU. But first and foremost, you must know about Africa. It is then you begin to understand the role of the African within the global. It is not for you to say, well, I want to do diplomatic studies. And of course, many of the departments of history that have developed that combo, history and diplomatic studies, history and strategic studies, history and geophysics is still coming. You have to understand that giving students such trending names will not make them historians. Because the students themselves tend more to pick from the high-sounding titles, high-sounding subjects. You will not catch them telling you that, oh yeah, well, which course are you taking? And they tell you, oh, I am looking at the history of the Zulu in South Africa. You know, they will tell you, yes, I am doing all those courses in diplomatic history. And of course, they do their shoulder somehow when they are telling you, as if history is a poor cousin. But without the knowledge of history, you will discover that even the diplomatic studies you are learning are deficient, they are anemic. And that is why you listen to some of the analysis done by experts in international politics, experts in political science, experts in international relations, and you tell yourself, what am I missing? You must be well grounded in history. Ex nihilo nihil fit. Out of nothing, nothing comes. Even as a lawyer, you must be well grounded in history. These are significant things that, how much time do I have? 2 minutes. Okay, so DK proposed the curriculum changes and drew significant attention to Ibadan from 1954 onwards. But after DK, there were also contributions by Ajayi. In 1959, the head of the department asked Ajayi to leave European history and begin to prepare a special subject on, quote and unquote, forest states of West Africa for the honor students. But apart from that, you also experience what I would call diversity and inclusiveness, emerging themes in African history. A major feature of the Ibadan curriculum was the acceptance of the principle of diversity. You know, in the 1960s, scholars began presenting seminar papers on emerging themes in their fields. And it's these emerging themes that began to give rise to new courses within history. These were things we no longer identify with. We continue to teach the same thing, but who in recent times has convened a seminar or a workshop on emerging themes in African history? It's not done. It's not being done. So these were things that began to influence changes within the history curriculum during that period. Olarontimai was sent abroad to improve his Arabic and French and carry on his interest in Islamic history. And that was why by 1972, he was able to publish the Segu Tukulo Empire. I am not sure any of our MA or PhD students can go that far to say, no, you are interested in history of Guinea, you have to go and learn French, you have to go outside to go and learn Arabic, that student will run away. So until you go back, you cannot continue to condemn what you are now ready to help change. People want the line of least resistance. They want the low-hanging fruits. Scholarship that they can do from their desk, and then within 3 months, and they are gone. So a special subject was also created on East Africa. Omar Cooper, within the department, also began the study of South African history. TGO Badamosi also worked on growth of Islam in Yoruba land. So when you had all this, it began to affect and influence the curriculum within the country. And then, of course, by 1962, when the social relationship with the University of London was terminated, this provided an opportunity for another overhaul of the curriculum. You could see the distinct faces now. By 1962, when with the link with London, curriculum changes also became experienced. So unless you began to track all these things, you would think that the history courses we had always been there. No, they reflected changes in society. And of course, we have history and neoliberalism. What happened from 1986? Neoliberalism almost killed history. And so history also had to go to the drawing board, because by 1996, people were no longer interested in history, since society was being pushed in a different direction. You can only take courses that are professionally inclined. You can only do courses that are scalable. History is one of the useless subjects. It's one of the useless courses. And so history also had to go back to the drawing board. And that was when Professor Ajayi developed that course on development, concepts, and realities in the third world. And it's one of the most popular courses that we have in the Department of History, because it tells you this is the way the West defines this. This is the way we look at it. This is the reality in the West. This is the reality in the developing world. With this course, you begin to understand how changes in African societies must be apprehended. So following from that, the new historiography became an integral part of the postgraduate program, which has expanded considerably since the 1990s. And so coming to the last section of what led to the changes in history curriculum, and that is the age of globalism and localism. Both went hand in hand. The department has adopted a strategic development plan designed to refocus and reposition it for challenges of the 21st century. We have also recognized the challenges of the 21st century. And so don't think we are just sitting down there and waiting for social sciences to come and rescue us. You know, we have taken on board some of the criticisms, some of the needs by the students, some of the needs of the societies to also affect our curriculum in the department. So at the undergraduate level, the following courses have been added to the curriculum. History of China. There's no way we're not teaching China before. Now China is on ground, because whether you like it or not, that's the new reality. Is your next superpower. You know, so we have introduced that. History of India since 1800 is one of the new courses. But of course, we are not going to create super global citizens without looking at what is going on at home. So part of what we have done now is to introduce Introduction to Ibadan History as a course. Introduction to Ibadan History. And then, of course, we now have a history of the Nigerian Civil War. It was not there before. History of the Nigerian Civil War is now on our paper. So you cannot just sit somewhere and think the Ibadan School of History is anachronistic, it's old-fashioned. It should be closed. It should be merged with classics. In fact, we have had that several times. And so as a way of concluding this piece, what is the future of the history curriculum? What is the future? Well, it is not in our character to talk about the future, like the Department of History Unilag, where they now give recommendations. At Ibadan, we have not started giving recommendations, and we don't hope to. Yeah, the future of the historical curriculum at Ibadan is central to the evolutionary narrative. Historical thinking, it is being said, should now entail both relevance and activism. Activism dropped out from history from the 1960s. It was there in the 1950s. But now, they are asking for activism to be reintroduced into historical scholarship. You know, and so historical exigencies within the country and society have radically changed since some of the courses were designed a couple of years earlier. The new history courses, and that's my conclusion, must reframe the story of contemporary religion in Nigeria, including topics like violence, religious conflicts. Don't leave it to religion alone. And the quest for peace, peaceful coexistence, if it is to remain relevant. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Prof. I want to take one of your classes, you know. I'm going to come to the history department soon. Thank you. Thank you. May I ask Prof. Olufunke Adebayo please to come, please? Who? So you? From you?
Sorry, Prof. Prof raised a lot of questions. Mine is not question, but a brief remarks. I wonder why Ibadan will not lead the charge to study crisis in African cities. We are in Ibadan, one of the largest urban centers in sub-Saharan Africa. As a historian, when are we going to start looking at, for instance, diseases in African cities, problem of urban infrastructure? I mean, we've had a lot of political history. Now the new curriculum in Ibadan reflect that dominant theme of political history again. But history of sexualities, gender, sport history, for instance, so that when our students move out of the continent, they can actually fit into that global conversation within the different themes of scholarship. Because our scholarship, new themes must also be reflected in our curriculum so that we can be global competitive, job market-wise. When you study cities in Africa, urban areas, medical history, women, sexualities, and what have you. But again, Ibadan now telling us it must be political.
Well, I'm sorry, it was because the director was chasing me. That was, you know, because chasing at times might not be physical. It can also be spiritual. He was chasing me in the spirit to say, time up. Yeah, but part of, I just didn't mention it, part of the courses we have also introduced. It's here, it's not that I'm making it up. It's issues in gender studies. It's now on the curriculum. And then we have introduction to the history of business, introduction to the history of business and entrepreneurship in Africa. You know, and so you could even see that because we are introducing these new courses, I am more livelier. Yeah. And so you are talking about urban studies, is there, but even looking at history, introduction of Ibadan history, where should we start from? When we look at urban studies, Ibadan is big, Ibadan is dynamic, but Ibadan is also dirty.
Thank you, Prof. Maybe Prof. Adeboye will have some answers to bring. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to everyone. I'm happy to be here. Now, I am Olufunke Adeboye from the Department of History and Strategic Studies, University of Lagos. So please, because I observed my affiliation was not properly stated on the program. Thank you. So I will be talking about this curriculum reform in historical studies. I just want to discuss our practices in Lagos, some of my own observations, where we came from, where we are now, and what does the future look like. And I am not shy to make recommendations. You would have recommendations at the end of a talk. So yes, we know that history deals with the reconstruction of the past, but the emphasis when we analyze is always on change and continuity, teasing out the changes and the surviving elements of the past. And so because of this, I think that the training of historians should also be dynamic to reflect the changing times and also retain relevant elements from the past. You know, we are not making a complete break to write off whatever we have been doing before. Whatever is still usable, is still relevant, will still be there. So the assumption that I also saw in the concept note here, that the history curricula in Nigerian universities have remained unchanged since the 70s. I said this is a generalization because there are universities that regularly reshape and realign their curricula, while others seem comfortable to make minimal, marginal, or what we call cosmetic changes here and there. There are other universities too that have been making that change. And so my concern here, my key argument here is that when we talk of curriculum reform, it should be taken holistically. It should go beyond prescribing content of courses, but also involve attention to the required resources and the pedagogical issues that are involved. So curriculum reform is not just the content. Oh, you put this history, you teach this history. How do you do it? What resources are you going to use to do it? That is my main concern here. I tried to define the curriculum as the template advocated for adoption. It's a template presented for adoption in teaching and learning, together with the supporting paraphernalia. All the supporting paraphernalia that will make it work is still part of the curriculum. Now, in this our side in Nigeria, yes, the superintending authority, the Nigerian University Commission, they have very clear prescriptions. The BMAS, the benchmark of minimum academic standards, is there, and you have it for every discipline. So that is prescribed. And the NUC also recommends that every 5 years, the curriculum should be revised, but not everybody does this. Now, what are my own views about curriculum reform? Ideally, it should be a collaborative venture by all stakeholders. The national superintending authorities, the universities, the teachers, the learners, the parents, employers of labor, and even professional bodies. And so I'm surprised that if students are saying, this is what I studied, and that is not nomenclature of the department, they are passing a message across that put some of these things into what you are offering us. In reality, the NUC prescribes minimum standards. But you see what they call minimum standards. When you look at the BMAS, the last one that is on their website, the 2015 draft, there is nothing minimum about it. Very elaborate minimum standards, which leave little room for institutions to reflect on their local conditions. But some institutions, some departments of history are still very creative. That in spite of this, they are still able to come up with something that conforms to the prescribed BMAS, but it still reflects their own local realities. Now, there is something I also consider to be the politics of curriculum reform. You see, even when the national superintending body, when they prescribe, those prescriptions reflect national interest, however they define it, whether overtly or covertly. In fact, in the BMAS for arts and the humanities, they state it clearly to equip students to contribute meaningfully towards the attainment of national goals and the satisfaction of national needs. Now, the question is, how do you define national goals? How do you define national needs? They offer their own conception of national goals and national needs in what they are offering. But universities also have that liberty to also annex what is in their immediate environment as their own contribution to meeting those national needs. In fact, let me quote again from that BMAS 2015, it says, to ensure that all programs in the humanities should have a built-in mechanism in which national aspirations are affirmed. Such mechanism should take cognizance of the following issues: socio-political development, the economy of the society, the fact of our pluralistic society, and the need to forge a strong and united country. These are all recommendations from the document. And I said, this is not peculiar to Nigeria. I looked at the Chinese case. They've been working on major reviews of their history curriculum. There was one major one in 1990 and another in 2003. And why did they do this? They wanted to foster student determination to support reform and open up to the world. You see, their previous curriculum concentrated so much on political history of Chinese society, Chinese structures. They are now saying that what they want to see in their education is education for patriotism on one hand and education for international consciousness. So they are paying more attention to world history, especially America and Europe, because they are moving out into the global space. And they want to take their population with them. They want, even at the level of the high school, students to understand what government is doing. Why are they doing it? Their tool for this reorientation is history. So that is part of what I call the politics of history. And in our own country too, it's the same thing. They may not, apart from what is said clearly in the BMAS from AUC, even in the courses they have pushed forward, it is part of it. And sometimes when some courses are pushed aside, it is also part of some strategy that is there. We should not lose sight of that. So what are to be reformed? That is the next question I'm posing. What are we reforming? Number one, the content of courses. To reflect local, national, and global dynamics. I'm in support with what all my predecessors have said concerning this. We start from the local to the national to the global. And we want to look at what we want to put into our curriculum at various levels. And like I said, the BMAS from AUC is very intense, but Department of Histories are still very creative. There's still room for that creativity. Secondly, what are we reforming? Teaching resources, especially the textbooks. Many of our textbooks are outdated. They are out of touch with present realities. And lack of relevant textbooks makes mockery of a well-developed curriculum. No matter how in tune with contemporary society that curriculum is, if there are no textbooks that students can easily pick and read to support it, that effort will lead into frustration. Thankfully, NUC is now awarding grants for university teachers to publish textbooks, but that cannot go around. It's still very few. It doesn't go around. What we need more is that more third-party funding should be assessed, and hopefully, IFRA may also award a few textbook publishing grants as a follow-up to this roundtable. What are we reforming? We are reforming our pedagogy, the delivery, the implementation of the curriculum. In many of our universities, this is still teacher-focused. The traditional narrative style, the lecturer comes to the front, sometimes with their hands in their pocket, facing the platform, and they just deliver the lecture extempore. And students open their eyes and, wow, very brilliant. It is all about the lecturer. Sometimes they come with their notes, which they dictate and they give. But you see, the focus is on the teacher, not on the students. Yes, NUC recommends tutorials and various assessment styles, but not many are able to do it in various universities. I mean, tutorials where you have a class of 250 history major students. How do you want to handle those tutorial classes? Ibadan here produced it. I remember in the days of Professor Ade Ajayi, J. Atoda, Omoniji. In the tutorial class, we were just like 10. We'll sit around the table, somebody will make a presentation, everybody will comment. But with the large classes we have now, in some of our universities, that is very problematic. I will still propose some solutions to that based on what we do in the University of Lagos. Sometimes when you organize field trips to take them out of the campus, let them see what you are talking about. When you have such a huge population, it is very problematic. So these are things we need to reform. Now, the history curricular reforms that we've had in the various departments. My colleague from Ibadan, our Ibadan, has given us the the trend of nationalist historiography when it started, the emphasis on great empires, the jihad, the religious movement, the rise of states, and all of that, economic and political history. And this reflected in all the graduate theses, the PhDs that were produced. But when the nation building themes came in the 60s and 70s, I remember there was a course that Professor Baro Ekime taught, intergroup relations in Nigeria. That course was specially designed to let students know that in Nigeria, even though we have over 200 different groups, we are not as different as it sounds. There were things that tied us together in the past. And that was one course that so many of us students said that we so much enjoyed in the 80s, that, oh, these are courses that can bring us together. But what I call the international turn came at the end of the 20th century, and it has continued into the beginning of the 21st century, when departments, again, because of market dynamics, they discovered that they are undersubscribed and they needed to expand what they are offering. And so that is why you have departments, history and international relations, history and diplomatic studies. And when they did it, they were justified because immediately that was done, the students came back and they started to offer it. Let me give you the example of the Department of History in Unilag. It was in 2004 that we changed our name from history to history and strategic studies. And that choice of strategic studies at that time was very, very strategic. Because we wanted to emphasize that even in what we had been teaching before, there were strategic components that needed to be brought up for people. And so strategies of state formation, strategies of warfare, strategies of economic, political economies and stuff like that. But you see, apart from that, there were also new courses, new modules that were introduced. We had gender studies, introduction to gender studies, gender and power since the 20th century, Nigerian women in national development, culture and tourism in independent Africa. We had maritime history, business history, environmental history, history of science and technology. All this we brought in as far back as 2004. And since then, we've had multiple reviews over the years. I won't bore you with details of that. Let me talk about other issues in curriculum reform, the pedagogy. We now focused on student-centered teaching activities, not teacher-centered. Because our concern was that, one, we needed to demystify some difficult courses that students had woven around some lecturer. And in fact, when they enter some classes, they will be shivering like this. We needed to demystify. So learning by research and self-experience was encouraged. What do we mean by learning by research and self-experience? For our tutorials, we divided students into groups. And in their groups, right from the beginning of the semester, you already knew the group you belonged to, you already knew the subject, the topic you were to prepare, and they were encouraged to go together. And so we saw that a lot of learning took place. There were slow learners. They were not all at the same point. Some were more resourceful than others. Some were more endowed. And so in between their groups, before the class, they would have sat together, prepared what they would say and all of that, and then they came to class. So the 2-hour lecture that we had, it was not the teacher that monopolized the 2 hours to do his thing. Lecturers could speak for an hour or 45 minutes, and the rest of the time, the students took over. In fact, in my own classes, it was like a panel. We had a table in front like this. The students will sit, the group that presented will sit in front. They will make their presentations, and all their colleagues will ask them questions. And we insisted everybody had to talk, not just the main speakers. Everybody had to talk. You had to say something to support. And what we saw was that a lot of learning took place within that context. Diversity in teaching methods. Documentaries, presentations were made, field trips, we made field trips. In fact, it's in the last 1 or 2 years now that I'm thinking, how do we address these field trips? These students are too many. I can now carry over 200 students on a field trip. The last one I did, it took us a whole week because we divided them into 5 groups, Monday to Friday. And the buses were running every day. Take one group, take one. We took permission from everybody. Parents had to give us permission. The school authority gave us permission. And I said, this is too much. But you see, there still has to be a way around this. But students enjoyed all those field trips. They will come back, they will write reports of what they saw. They will tell you how it has impacted them, that they can now see for themselves and connect directly with all those things they had been reading in books and discussing. So the field trips were very, very useful. And then the cooperation among students also enhanced the process of learning. Now, again, what do we reform? Resources. Production of current textbooks. I've mentioned that. Again, the academic quality of textbooks should be ensured, because sometimes we do self-publication. If you cannot get a grant, I can package all my lecture notes together and then give to one printer to print for me, and then it becomes a textbook. No, because there's no peer review there, and that there are several things that should not be there. So there should be proper quality control, even when we need to prepare the textbooks. Our universities could also provide more grants for textbook publication, or we look for third-party funding. And then incorporating digital tools with increasing efficiency. That is something we did. And I must confess, even in Lagos, we had to fight with some people on faculty that we consider old school. Old school because that digital technology was like too much stress. What is this thing now? And thankfully, thank God for COVID. You know, that COVID thing really helped us. Even people had been resisting it before. When classes were taken online, they had no choice. Everybody now had to flow and to learn all these things, acquire the relevant skills, and everybody came on board. So as I conclude, curriculum review should be done holistically, not just the content of what we teach. And in history, it is important that we carry along all the major stakeholders. It should not be a top-down thing alone. It should be bottom-up, top-down, let everybody meet, let's harvest opinions from several places. Conservative departments should be encouraged to review their curriculum. Even the methods, their methodology, let us be open. There is nothing criminal about asking students to do theoretical framework, to strengthen their analysis. Nothing criminal about it. I'm not looking in any direction. I'm looking straight. We can encourage that. Another thing that I know helps is the benefit of international exposure, both for students and for faculty. And by international, I'm not necessarily talking of the global north. It could be there, it could be the other African countries or Asia. Let's have exchange programs. Send our students there. At least they are from the same developmental background. Let us see how history is practiced there. Yes, we are concerned about our local circumstances, but we cannot develop in isolation. We bring in bits and pieces from different places, and we have a robust discussion, not just in our curriculum reform, but also in the way we impact the world outside the university. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof, for this very lively talk. And I've heard you call for a textbook. Thank you. Can I call Dr. Aisha Bawa to the floor, please? Thank you, Doctor. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. I really want to appreciate the organizers of this roundtable discussion for inviting me all the way from far north, from Sokoto, from the desert, to be in Ibadan. Actually, I think what I'm going to speak here is going to be quite different from what other speakers have said. When I saw my name in a panel with Professor Funke Adeboye, I said, oh no, these are issues that has to do with gender. So actually, I coined my presentation in that respect. In line with what she has presented, I come from the Northwest, and looking at the curriculum of history, which I have been teaching in the past 17 years, I actually saw the missing link in the curriculum. And looking at the 21st century in which we are, a lot of things has happened. There is a lot of change. Globalization has taken place. And once there is change, so there is need for us to follow the change. Otherwise, we'll be consumed by the influence of the change. The curriculum in which we teach, apart from hearing it today that University of Lagos has gender history since 2004. I want to say that this thing has not yet taken place in where I teach. That is Usman Danfodio University, Sokoto. So we are still conservative in terms of what we teach, the nature of our history. The curriculum needs to be reformed in order to go with the emergent changes. What are we saying? There are changes in the areas of research, emergent disciplines, from African history to cultural history to now gender history. So actually what I said is the danger of a single history, the danger of a single history. Going by the emergence of African history, a lot of scholars today have actually talked about the need and the necessity that brought about the study of African history, particularly to challenge the Eurocentric views about Africa. And that was what actually engaged our nationalist historians from the Ibadan School of History to Zaria School of History to come up with what we refer to as the drum and the trumpet, by trying to glorify the empires and kingdoms in the study of Africa, to actually represent Africa in such a way that the Eurocentric idea that Africa has no history, Africa is uncivilized, the works of people like Troboropa, Newton, and so many others. That was what brought about Kenneth Dike, the likes of J.F. Ade Ajayi, to work on different aspects of the original history. In terms of presentations, we found an omission. The omission in the sense that because of the need of the curriculum at that particular time was to challenge the notion that Africa has a history. Women were completely omitted in the narration. And those are the foundations of our curriculum in teaching African history. I have taught history at the undergraduate level where we have empires. We are talking about empires, Mali, Ghana, Songhai. What happened to the women? We are not only saying that women must be presented if they don't have any role in which they play, but there are impacts or consequences of such emergence. What impact has any movement had on women? What consequences does that have on women? They need to be presented in our history. So I said the history we teach is completely a one-side narration. So women have been hidden in the history. So I say African history grew in the late 1950s and early 1960s as an attempt to challenge the colonial Eurocentric views about Africa. Looking at what Hugh Trevor, Newton, Hegel claimed, that Africans had no civilization and those have no history, which was quite a biased presentation. It is, however, important to state that colonial views of African history were biased, prejudiced, and misleading. Reacting to this Eurocentric advanced view, the decades before and after independence, African nationalist historians began to change this view of African history and embark on drum and trumpet. glorifying African empires and kingdoms. African scholars like B.A. Ogot, Kenneth Dike, Obaro Ikeme, among others, their writing tend to concentrate on the spectacular achievement of men and gloss over the contributions of women. The hidden of women from most historical accounts is not unconnected with the views of our ancient philosophers like Aristotle. In one of his writings, he asserts that the male is by nature superior and the female inferior, and the rules and the other is rule. So this actually the assertion and many other writings rendered women invisible into the historical narrations as well as the curriculum. So I now define curriculum as an academic program or a policy document introduced to educational system in Nigeria aimed at equipping students with the necessary knowledge. So if that is the aim of a curriculum, single narration of a history in what aspect? In an aspect of the achievement of men in terms of war, in terms of diplomacy, in terms of great achievement of political history, you completely see that the women's narrations are completely omitted. Even though, despite the fact that a lot of efforts were put in place, globally, I can say that misrepresentations we found in United States of America, as well as in Europe, where the discipline of history has been also seen as more of masculinity. And that led to the emergence of another areas they call her story. But her story is not only talking about the role and contributions women made, but what are the consequences, what effect, what influence that historical movement had on women. For instance, we talk about industrialization, the history of industrial revolution. We always talk about transformation, but transformation in which sense? Where are the women? How did the industrialization affect the lives of women? These are things that history is supposed to document. These are the things that are supposed to appear in our curriculum. When we talk about historic movements, such as I saw students clamoring when they talk about Nigerian Civil War. Yes, you are talking about Nigerian Civil War, but it's not only talking about the war, but what effect has that civil war had on women? Yes, what is the consequences of the war on women? So these are the things that maybe if we are coming to change the curriculum, we are going to change our course content, we should take cognizance of. I know in some places like Lagos, they have been doing that. But in where I come from in Sokoto, we teach the Sokoto Caliphate. Yes, where we talk about jihad, the jihad movement, we talk about Shehu, we talk about Muhammad Bello, we talk about Abdullah Gwandu. What about other women apart from Nana Asma'u? You find out that they are completely omitted in the discourse, as if we find out that those women are invisible. They are visible. It's just that they have not been brought to limelight. Women have participated in the jihad. Women have participated in nationalist movement. But who are those women we hear? We don't dig into the archives. We don't go back into the history to bring out those narrations. So now I talk about the need for what I call gender inclusive curriculum. It is not only in Sokoto. Right now, I'm doing my sabbatical in Nasarawa State University, KP, History Department. There is nothing about gender in the curriculum. It's still conservative. So I'm talking about those universities that are yet to take cognizance of this change. Like Dr. Jimo said, whether we like it or not, gender has come to be part of academic analysis. It has been used in research. So it should be included in our curriculum in order to have a gender balanced history narration. In terms of our methodology, from what we have mostly research and the method, the lecture method type is so boring. The lecture method is so boring. But I think with spices and eats, with putting ingredients to discuss about the role of our mothers, the role of other marginalized group in the society, like discussing the bottom to top history, will actually make our students to be lively. It will make the student very interesting, like teaching the Sokoto Caliphate, having a day or two to take my student to the room of Nana Asma'u to know that, yes, this is not folktales. This is not made. It has happened. Nana Asma'u room is still there in Sokoto. If you want to see it, you can come and see. So we can take the student out, engage them in excursion, not necessarily the historical society that we normally have at the end of the year. Let other teachers of history of every course have a gender test in their curriculum. It will actually enhance the teaching. It will also make a kind of acceptability, and it also makes the history to be more interesting with the kind of challenges. I don't want to talk about Lagos, where you are saying you have about 200 undergraduate students. I'm talking about where I have about 30 students. 30 students. It's not enough. To have a class of 30 is not enough. So we want students to know that, yes, in history, you can have a course in gender history. For those who actually want to master in the area of gender, having that knowledge will actually encourage them to come and read history. And also with regard to our digitization, the going for archival, sometimes you ask students to go to archives. We have them. Recently, I was engaged in discussing with the person in charge of Waziri Junaidi History and Culture Bureau. He told me that some of our students, when they come for research, they see the archive so dusty, you know, so dirty. So they never want to go there. They'll say, I'm coming back tomorrow, and you never see them. So we have to actually make those places interesting, like we are trying to compare what is obtainable in London. In London, so as I know it's not like that. So we try to see how we can borrow a leaf from there, so that students will find it very interesting in us even maybe going to the archive with a lab coat. They can have a lab coat that will create a kind of impression in them that they are in a discipline that is actually a kind of a creative, exposing them as if they are going to the laboratory where the medical students are going. So we can engage that. So these are the things we do to revive the interest and the prestige in which history has lost its past glory. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Well, I'm sure you got quite a few questions here. Well done, Doctor. Well done, yeah. Any questions or a short comment? If you want to make comments, make it short, please. One question, yeah, from students here. There you go.
Thank you so much. My first comment would be that how for example, I work in a published company sometimes back, and that even to the level of primary, secondary schools, we now have textbooks that is talking more of history of Nigeria. For example, I edited some of those books, and I found out that the slightest details of saying that we now have more women, according to said, some of those history are going back to primary and secondary school. Not just, for example, some of them like I found in those books, I don't have them because I did government for about 3 years, and some of the things I found in that book are not there. So to also corroborate the fact that we have Anglo-centric view of how history has been written, I think that is also correct. Now I was working with WODOC at the point, Women Research Document Center of University of Ibadan, and we were trying to pass a program called Women in the Book. It has a Yoruba community that says, so what we're doing is that we are going back into archives to begin to extract women. Not many people understand the impact of people understand her to be, narratives understand her to be a wicked and vicious woman. But we also found out that right in some documentations also, she were one of those women who did fantastically well in the pre-colonial era that spanned even to the colonial period. So I will stop there because of others want to make contributions. But the whole conclusion is that we are looking back to archives and books to bring out women as it helps make the world a better gender balance. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm so grateful that we're beginning to talk about, gender perspectives in, academia. My own observation, one of the things that angers me a lot is the fact that Fumilara and Kuti in the history, according to what I was taught, was successfully reduced to the first woman to drive a car. I mean, not until I began to study for that did I find out that she did such exceptional things. So beyond, having gender inclusive representation of history, who are the people who are going to write those histories? Would they be fair to be accurate as to the things that happened and not appropriate it, in other ways? Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sekinat Lasisi. I lecture in Olabisi Onabanjo University. Now, my comment is on the NUC benchmark. This as the experience we had in our school, in my department particularly, was that the benchmark, just like Professor Adeboye said, is almost exhaustive. You can hardly, manage to put in anything creative. And then the kind of school that we also have, the university management wants accreditation. And so the instruction, it's like a thing of instruction that follow the benchmark. And so when we try to do that, it reduces our creativity with the teaching of history. And I don't know if there can be a synergy between the NUC and then the Nigerian Society of Historians, the History Society of Nigeria, for instance. Because taking a cue from what Prof said, there needs to be the coming together of all these stakeholders so as to improve our teaching of history. Thank you.
I take one question from here, please. Yes.
Good day, everyone. My name is Lion Gard. One issue that kept bothering me was it's good to have reforms. We want to have reforms in this country in many spheres of our lives. But sometimes those who are going to drive those reforms, don't you think we need to reform their own mindsets too? We want to drive a reform by those who are part of the problems that led to the need for the reforms in the first place. I'm saying this in the perspective of University of Ibadan, approaching one very serious problem since 1970, and that is the history of the Nigerian Civil War. You will all believe that up till now, there has not been official report on the Nigerian Civil War, because many of us sometimes will write with our mindsets than available facts. Now that the University of Ibadan is going to teach the history of the Nigerian Civil War, those who are going to write it, are they going to be honest enough? I know objectivity is a big problem. I'm a journalist. I trained as a journalist and a historian. And between the two disciplines, one issue that keeps popping up is objectivity. Forget about the objectivity. When you are stating your own case, you will never say anything that will implicate you. Yes or no? So those who are going to talk about the history of the Nigerian Civil War now, are they going to talk about it from the perspective of the Biafran or from the go on with one Nigeria syndrome? We need to talk about the mindset of those who are going to drive the reforms in our curriculum. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I will give the microphone to Professor Olani in a second. But just to tell you, I created a course on the history of Nigeria in England, King's College London, and I teach the history of the Civil War. And I can tell you that finding books and sources which deal about the two sides of the war, or the different sides of the war, was quite hard. Yes, yes. Yeah. I was talking about Prof. Adeshina a few years ago, finding the right sources, it's quite difficult.
Thank you, Vincent. Curriculum reform is a continuous process. So we must give credit to most departments of history in Nigerian universities that have embarked on reforms over time. So it will be very disingenuous for some of us to claim that some departments are very static because they didn't take one course or the other on board. And I also want to assure you that BMAS provided by NUC is just a template. It gives you a lot of room for creativity. I was amazed when I went to Federal University Buzo recently, how they have created the issue of Sanfara. Sanfara was a major player in the issue of Nigeria in the pre-colonial era. So they have that history now. That's their own local history, which is not peculiar to Ibadan or Lagos or Ife or elsewhere. So the BMAS is just a template for you to abide by national standards. It's not that they are imposing anything on you. But in reviewing our curriculum, we must also bear in mind about the fact that if we take out some issues from the curriculum and then add new ones, we must avoid creating new conflicts. And also, we must avoid this issue of re-energizing colonial bias, in the sense that there are some ethnic groups that have been removed from the curriculum. Take, for example, Juku. I'm talking about the elementary history now. Now there are claims that, okay, this history is too cumbersome, the curriculum is too boring and so on. And in that attempt, we have started to remove some ethnic groups, some communities from the curriculum. We are creating new conflicts. So we need to be very careful. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to take one question here. I think I'm going to ask students to ask more questions, okay? I saw your hand before, yes, on the left as well. Okay, I'd like to encourage students to ask questions as well, okay?
Thank you so much. Two questions, please. One for the last speaker and one for the first speaker. For the last speaker, Ma, you said something more about the gender imbalance. And the question is, don't you think religion play a crucial role, a crucial factor in that imbalance? That's the question. Then the second question is to the first speaker. When you were talking, sir, the first keynote today, that's Professor Falola, talks about a little dual side of history, maybe history and something together. And then, but when you were talking, sir, you intends to say that when it is history and strategic study, for instance, people tend to focus more on the strategic study than the history part. So I'm thinking maybe it's a question of this or that, or maybe it's actually a this and that question. So I want to look at the ambivalence there. Thank you, sir.
Dr. Bawa, it was a classical question.
Thank you. In response to your question on religion playing a role in not having a gender balance. So what I'm looking at, the issue of research and the issue of teaching. So if I'm talking about Islamic history, there is need to have the role in which women play in the Islamic civilization or in Islamic history. So there is nothing like a religion playing. This is what we are trying to say. So in our teaching, in every aspect you take in our courses, you find out that there is a thought in which we can present either its effect or the role and contribution in whatever way. We're talking about slavery. Women are there, but you find out that in our discourse, we have been carried out discussing in maybe demography, as well as the movement. Hardly you see in some places they mention the percentage of women that were taken in slavery in our discourse. And the other question, she's talking about how do we have an objectivity in those who are trying to put the old wine in the fresh bottle. Yes, in our discovery of those women. It depends on who are doing the research. We are not saying that only women should search for women. Men are also engaged in researching women. So there should be objectivity in their discourse and analysis. Thank you.
Thank you very much. One quick response to his question on religion and discourse on women. I think he's right. He's right because, you see, embedded within religion is that still old patriarchal nature in which the voice of women are somehow muted and silenced. And so it becomes very difficult at times for the issue of women to be extracted from the mass, from the whole, and brought out into reckoning. And I hope that somehow we'll be able to surmount that very soon, but it is there. But my second comment has to do with the BMAS. Professor Ladi just spoke about the BMAS, being flexible, being reasonable. That's an academic view of the BMAS. I created the history program of Bowen University. And what I did with that was to create a one-in-town kind of history curriculum to say, look, let's move ahead of what you have in the BMAS. And then, of course, when they came from the NUC, they said, no. You can't begin to create new subjects outside what is in the BMAS. Yeah, the history of Zamfara is safe. We also have history of Ibadan now. But try to create history of historic sites. You will begin to see that the NUC will keep you and say, no. Did you see anything like that in the BMAS? And so unless the NUC itself begins to remove its knees from our throats, then it's going to be difficult for history curriculum at times to go the whole hog in the kind of reform we are trying to see. Thank you.
Thank you, both of you.
The Historical Society of Nigeria, now I think there is a challenge. How do we go around this gatekeeping, the politics of gatekeeping by NUC?
Well, the Historical Society of Nigeria has good intentions. But at times when you are also open your flanks to certain predilections as well as certain desires, it becomes significantly difficult for you to fight. the kind of things historical society is doing is fight in the daytime and go and beg you in the night. We cannot afford, but ultimately, we will have, I hope, in the nearest future, a historical society that understands the need, go beyond what we have today, and then sit down to serious business. When you also look at some of the things they have written as books or as curriculum, you begin to wonder what is going on. But like Haji Abawa said, we need a kind of inclusiveness in the creation of curriculum, which is not happening. Thank you.
Thank you. A quick one from Professor Boy, and after the microphone is yours.
I just want to react to one of the questions, even though it wasn't directed at me. It's on gender history. Someone asked who will write accurate gender history, and the person gave the example of Fusheto and Iwura that has been maligned in the previous narratives. You see, every generation rewrites its own history. The generation that wrote about Fusheto and Iwura, and then the filmmakers took it from them, added dramatic effect and brought it out. Another generation came and corrected it. In other words, there is no last say. Nobody has the last word when it comes to the writing of history. Based on your contemporary situation, you can pick up any issue that has been raised in the past and revisit it. So that is it. So it's an ongoing thing. If you want to write on it, you are free to write. Someone else will come in 10 years' time and go back to the same issue and say, no, there is another perspective. So it's an ongoing debate.
Thank you, sir. My name is Ajiboye Absala from ADM Federal University of Education, Ondo State. I'm having a comment on Professor Funke Adiboye and about the research, about the group work, about the presentations. And thankfully, we have a lecturer and Mr. that brought us here. He has actually been practicing this since when he has been teaching us so far. Thank you very much for that. And thank you, sir. My question is actually directed to Professor Olushtayo Adeshina. So you talked about the reforms in the history curriculum. So you talked about the China, the gender, and so on. So my question goes thus. So what do you think, in your own opinion, sir, after all these reforms have been made, do you think it's going to contribute positively, or how do you think it's going to develop the students and the society as a whole, in the type of society we are in, our contemporary society, sir? That's my question, sir.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your line of thinking. But history is not about just merely learning the facts of history. It is also by training the mind to understand society, or training the mind to look at the trajectory of world history and your position within that history. So if you introduce a course like Chinese history, you begin to also see how China, for instance, rose from a poor society. In the 70s, the picture we had of China had to do with poverty, hunger, but now what we are talking about is prosperity. Question is, how did they do it? And so that takes you into something else, which also talks about the Chinese grand strategy for moving that country out of poverty into prosperity. We are not going to replicate the Chinese example line by line, but it's just for you to understand that adopting certain approaches, shedding certain weights, and some other things will help your society to also move forward. So history is not designed for you to learn only the facts. There is what you call human self-understanding. There is the didactic nature of history, which teaches you about change, continuity, growth, development, underdevelopment in society. That's what we talk about in history. So don't confuse history with that subject that tells you about the dates, the people, and of course, no, it's more than that. And so that's why over time we have changed the definition of what history is from maybe learning about man in the past to history being the totality of human experience. It's totality of human experience. I remember I went for a conference in Ife, floated by the Faculty of Architecture in those days. And they were questioning what a historian was doing, attending a conference in architecture. And I said, you are missing the point. Because as a historian, one of the things you understand by changing society reflects in the architecture of every society. If there is prosperity in society, you will know through the architecture. If there is history in society, you understand through architecture. If there is poverty and decay and the collapse of society, you reflect it in the architecture. And so, as historians, we point you in the direction of the utility value of history, not only about rote learning. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. One quick question. Is it a quick question? Okay, it's the last one. Thank you. I have to have a lunch break.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Moyoluwa by name. I'm from Adeyemi Federal University of Education. And I want to ask Professor Olufunke a question. He said about teaching resources, but as the students nowadays, we are not reading from the textbook. We are going online for researches. But all these online researches are irrelevant sometimes. So how can we solve the problem of removing irrelevant information online?
It's a very good question, and good luck, Prof.
Thank you for that question. You asked it the way my students too used to ask. You see, the issue is that when what the mentality of students is that there should be one source that you should direct them that contains everything they need on that particular subject. Just give them one source and then they have all of it. But you see, what we also encourage is that students should be able to tease out what is important from an array of information and discard the unimportant ones. That is part of the training too. So lecturers will provide a reading list together with a course outline that gives you the curriculum and then say, okay, go. Whether you find them online or you find them in your library, go and look for them. And then they come back, they said the books are too many. I said, that is the idea. Start from the first one. Go through it. Whatever is relevant, you pick it. Whatever is not relevant, you discard it. At the end of the day, all the relevant ones, you tie them together. And then you will now process them through your own mind to come up with your own explanation for the issue you are trying to address. So there is no shortcut. No shortcut. There is no single book that contains everything. You still need to look around. And you see, some of the trainings they gave us in Ibadan here, I still thank Ibadan for that. There's a special paper. By the time you get to your final year, you must take a special paper. I did a revolution and aftermath in Buganda, East Africa. They gave you a list of documents. And then you had to read everything to draw out, to extract. By the time you pass through that special paper, you know that, yes, you know what it takes to do research on your own. So please don't be afraid, don't shy away from it. It's part of the training. We've all gone through it. I'm sure you will succeed by the grace of God.
Thank you, Prof. Dr. Bawa, last words before lunch break.
It's just to add to what she has said. I think most students, when you give their assignment, they go to Google. And in Google, you see all sorts of jargons, a lot of things people sit down in their room and write. But there is Google Scholar, where you see academic works. If you are able to subscribe, you'll be able to get quality resource material. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. If you're interested in online resources on Nigeria, there's a Facebook page, Nigerian Nostalgia Project. You might have heard about it. There are 2 Facebook pages actually. There's also an Instagram account called Half of Nigeria, if you're interested in photos with like good captions as well. It's very interesting. Anyway, thank you for this morning. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you, I really enjoyed it. Now I've got a small announcement about our lunch break. I will call our speakers first to go have lunch. Then all those registered, okay, for the conference, and then please the others. Is that okay? So first the speakers, those registered, and finally everyone else. Is that okay? So thank you, and I guess I will ask everyone to reconvene to come back at 2:30, please. Okay, 2:30. Okay, thank you.
I just getting okay with that body, they were tap off from my head, I did hit down, you be scared, and if I go stop, you go vex you. But it go hard, you go mad, you me, I think you walk, I don't know, all night. You give me one last ride. Me, I think you walk, all night. I give me one last ride. I make your body go, 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 go.